The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Eleanor Porter wiped the sweat from her brow. Her dreams of a new life in Laredo, Texas, seeming more distant with each creaking rotation of her wagon wheels. The year was 1875, and like many heading west after the Civil War, Eleanor was seeking something beyond the ashes of her former life: opportunity, purpose, and perhaps even redemption. Eleanor had left behind everything familiar in St. Louis after her husband's death from consumption had shattered her comfortable existence. At 28, she was neither young enough to be carefree nor old enough to surrender to a life of quiet widowhood. The deed to a small parcel of land near the Rio Grande, purchased by her late husband in a moment of optimistic speculation, was tucked securely in her travel case, along with whatever courage she had managed to gather for this journey. "Just a few more miles," she murmured to her team of oxen, their massive shoulders straining against the weight of her possessions: furniture, kitchen supplies, books, and seeds for the garden she intended to plant. Eleanor prided herself on preparedness, but as the trail ahead steepened unexpectedly, she felt a flicker of doubt. The approaching ridge wasn't marked on her map. Eleanor pulled back gently on the reins, considering her options. The main trail veered sharply to the right, adding miles to her journey, while a narrower path continued straight ahead over the ridge. "We've come too far to add another day's travel," she decided, guiding her team toward the more direct route. The oxen lumbered forward, their hooves raising small clouds of dust with each step. The wagon began its ascent, wheels struggling against the loose rocks and dry soil. Halfway up the ridge, Eleanor heard an ominous crack. She barely had time to register the sound before her world tilted violently. One of the rear wheels had struck a boulder hidden by the tall grass, snapping its axle. The heavy wagon lurched sideways, then began to roll. Eleanor's scream tore through the quiet afternoon as the wagon tumbled, throwing her clear but catching her left leg beneath the edge of the overturned vehicle as it came to rest. Blinding pain shot through her limb, and the breath was knocked from her lungs. Pinned by the crushing weight of her worldly possessions, Eleanor's vision swam with tears and dust. "Help!" she cried out, though she knew the futility of it. The nearest settlement was miles away, and travelers on this stretch of road were rare. Her oxen, mercifully freed from their harnesses during the accident, stood nearby, regarding her with placid confusion. As the initial shock began to fade, panic rose in its place. Eleanor could feel warm blood soaking through her skirts. She tried to pull herself free, but succeeded only in sending fresh waves of agony through her trapped limb. The weight of the wagon was immovable, and the angle made it impossible for her to leverage herself away from it. Time passed with excruciating slowness. The afternoon heat intensified, and thirst clawed at her throat. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening bringing fresh despair as she realized her predicament remained unchanged. It was during one of these periods of clouded awareness that she first heard the hoofbeats. At first she thought it was a hallucination born of desperation, but the rhythm was too steady, too real. With the last of her strength, Eleanor called out again. "Help, please, over here." The hoofbeats paused, then quickened. Through dust-caked lashes, Eleanor saw a figure on horseback crest the ridge. The silhouette was tall and broad-shouldered against the merciless sky, the brim of a cowboy hat shading features she couldn't yet distinguish. "Madam, you all right down there?" The voice was deep, concerned, and unmistakably real. "I'm trapped," Eleanor managed, her voice cracked and dry. "The wagon, my leg." In seconds, the rider had dismounted and was at her side, assessing the situation with swift, practiced movements. Eleanor caught her first clear glimpse of her potential savior, a man in his early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. His clothes were trail-worn but well-kept, marking him as a working cowboy rather than a drifter. "Name's Rowan Zimmerman, madam," he said, kneeling beside her. "Ranch hand from the Double Cross. I'm going to get you out of there." Eleanor watched as Rowan circled the overturned wagon, calculating angles and leverage. He returned to her side, his expression grim but determined. "No way to lever it up without risking it shifting onto you further," he explained. "I'm going to have to lift it." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. The wagon was loaded with everything she owned, far too heavy for any single man to lift. "That's impossible," she whispered. Rowan's eyes met hers, and in that moment, Eleanor saw something that kindled a flicker of hope, absolute conviction. "Not impossible, madam. Necessary." Without further discussion, Rowan positioned himself at the edge of the wagon nearest Eleanor's trapped leg. He removed his hat and gloves, placing them carefully on the ground. Then he squatted down, getting his shoulders under the wagon's edge, hands gripping firmly. "When I lift, you pull yourself clear. Don't hesitate, don't worry about hurting yourself further, just move." His voice was calm, focused. Eleanor nodded, bracing herself on her elbows. Rowan drew a deep breath, then with a sound somewhere between a prayer and a battle cry, he began to rise. The muscles in his back and shoulders bunched and strained beneath his shirt. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of wood and metal, the wagon lifted just inches, but enough. Eleanor didn't waste the moment. Ignoring the excruciating pain, she dragged herself backward, pulling her bloodied leg from beneath the wagon's edge. The second she was clear, Rowan released his hold and the wagon crashed back down with a thunderous finality. He was at her side immediately, his breathing heavy but controlled. "Let me see that leg, madam." Eleanor was light-headed from pain and relief. "Eleanor," she managed. "Eleanor Porter." "Miss Porter." Rowan nodded, gently examining her injured limb. The fabric of her skirt was torn and bloodied, revealing a deep gash along her calf, but miraculously the bone appeared unbroken. "You're mighty lucky. Could have lost this leg." "Lucky," Eleanor repeated, a hysterical laugh threatening to bubble up. "I've lost everything else." Rowan's eyes tracked to the overturned wagon, then back to her face. Something in his expression shifted, not pity but recognition. "Not everything," he said quietly. "You're alive. And in these parts, that counts for a whole lot." As he spoke, he was already tearing strips from his own bandana to bind her wound. His hands were calloused but gentle, moving with efficient care. "I need to get you to town," Rowan continued. "Dr. Simmons isn't the friendliest sort, but he knows his trade. Can you ride?" Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't entirely certain. "I'll manage." Rowan finished bandaging her leg, then stood and whistled for his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding that came trotting obediently to his master's call. "This is Chance," Rowan said, patting the horse's neck. "Best cow pony in 3 counties and steady as they come." He turned to Eleanor with unexpected formality. "Madam, I'm going to have to carry you." Before she could respond, he had scooped her up as if she weighed no more than a child, careful of her injured leg. Eleanor found herself pressed against his chest, aware of his heartbeat and the clean, sun-dried scent of his clothing. "Your belongings," she began. "Will still be here," he finished. "First things first." With surprising agility for a man of his size, Rowan mounted Chance while still holding Eleanor securely, settling her across his lap. "I've got some men working cattle not far from here," he explained as they began to ride. "I'll send them back for your oxen and to guard your wagon until we can arrange to right it." Eleanor looked back at the overturned wagon, her hopes, her future, her past, all jumbled together in a broken heap. Why would you do that for a stranger? Rowan was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. Out here, nobody stays a stranger for long, Miss Porter. That's just the way of things. As they rode toward Laredo, Eleanor found herself studying her rescuer's profile. There was a steadiness to him that she hadn't encountered in a man before, not the bravado that her late husband had sometimes affected, nor the restless energy of the fortune seekers she'd observed heading west. Rowan Zimmerman moved through the world as if he knew his place in it. "Have you lived in Laredo long?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly to distract herself from the throbbing pain in her leg. "Since '68, he answered. "Came west after Appomattox with nothing but my horse and what I was wearing. The Double Cross took me on as a hand, and I've been there since." "You fought in the war?" Eleanor asked, noting the way his jaw tightened slightly. "Union cavalry, saw things no man should see." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "When it was over, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." Eleanor understood that sentiment all too well. She had her own ghosts, her husband's wasted face in those final days, the small graves of the 2 children she had lost to fever before they'd reached their first birthdays. "I'm from St. Louis," she offered. "My husband bought land near here before he passed. I came to claim it." Rowan nodded, processing this information. "Whereabouts is this land?" "Along the river, about 5 miles south of town, according to the deed." A curious expression crossed Rowan's face. "The old Mendoza place." "You know it?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Know of it. Good water rights, decent soil. Previous owner went back to Mexico after some trouble with rustlers." He glanced down at her. "It's isolated, though. Not the easiest place for a woman alone." Eleanor bristled slightly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Zimmerman." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Didn't figure you for the fainting type, Miss Porter. Not many women would have survived what you just did with their wits intact." They crested a small hill, and suddenly the town of Laredo spread before them, a collection of adobe and wooden structures nestled against the river's curve, with the Mexican town of Nuevo Laredo visible on the opposite bank. Compared to St. Louis, it was barely more than an outpost, but to Eleanor's weary eyes, it represented sanctuary. Rowan guided Chance directly to a modest building with a faded sign identifying it as Dr. Simmons' office. Before Eleanor could prepare herself, Rowan had dismounted and lifted her again, carrying her toward the door with the same seemingly effortless strength he had shown in freeing her from the wagon. The doctor, a grizzled man with spectacles perched on a prominent nose, looked up irritably as they entered, but his expression changed when he saw Eleanor's condition. "On the table," he directed Rowan, already reaching for his instruments. "What happened?" "Wagon accident." "Leg was trapped," Rowan explained succinctly. "Bleeding's mostly stopped, but the wound needs cleaning." Dr. Simmons nodded, examining the makeshift bandage. "You did this?" he asked Rowan, who nodded. "Not bad for a cowboy." He turned his attention to Eleanor. "This is going to hurt, madam." Eleanor closed her eyes, bracing herself. When the doctor began cleaning the wound, the pain was indeed intense. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding Rowan's and gripping it tightly. If he was surprised, he didn't show it, simply returning the pressure of her fingers with steady reassurance. "No signs of infection yet," Dr. Simmons muttered as he worked. "Lucky, but you'll need to stay off it for at least a week, preferably 2. "I can't," Eleanor protested. "I need to salvage my wagon, set up my homestead." "You can and you will," the doctor interrupted firmly. "Unless you want to lose that leg after all." Eleanor fell silent, despair washing over her. Where would she stay? How would she afford lodging? Her small reserve of money wouldn't last long, and her immediate hopes of self-sufficiency had been dashed with her wagon. As if reading her thoughts, Rowan spoke up. "The Henderson boarding house has a ground floor room. Would suit while you're recovering." Dr. Simmons snorted. "And who's going to pay for that? Martha Henderson doesn't take promises as currency." Before Eleanor could respond, Rowan reached into his pocket and placed several coins on the doctor's desk. "This should cover both your fee and a week at the boarding house." Eleanor stared at him in shock. "Mr. Zimmerman, I can't possibly accept. It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's an advance. Once you're healed, you can work it off helping with the accounts at the ranch. Our foreman tries, but numbers aren't his strong suit, and the owner's getting too old for the fine details." Eleanor was speechless. She had expected many challenges on this journey west, but not this kind of unexpected kindness from a stranger. "Why?" she finally managed. Rowan met her gaze directly. "Because somebody once did the same for me when I needed it. That's how we survive out here, Doctor." Simmons finished binding her leg with clean bandages. "Keep it elevated. Change the dressing daily. Come back in a week, sooner if there's increased pain or fever." He handed her a small bottle. "Laudanum for the pain. Use it sparingly." Rowan thanked the doctor, then once again lifted Eleanor. Outside, he whistled for Chance. But instead of mounting, he led the horse on foot toward a 2-story wooden building a few doors down, with Henderson Boarding House painted in neat letters above the entrance. Martha Henderson proved to be a plump, efficient woman of about 50, with shrewd eyes that took in Eleanor's condition, and Rowan's dust-covered appearance in one comprehensive glance. "Trouble, Mr. Zimmerman?" she asked, already moving to open the door to a small but clean room off the main hallway. "Miss Porter had an accident with her wagon," Rowan explained. "Needs a place to recuperate." Mrs. Henderson nodded, bustling ahead to turn down the bedcovers. "We can manage that. Been a while since we had a respectable lady staying with us. Mostly get cattle buyers and freight agents these days." Rowan set Eleanor gently on the bed, stepping back with an almost palpable sense of propriety. "I'll send word to the ranch about your wagon and oxen," he told her. "And I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly reluctant to see him go. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. I don't know how I'll ever repay." He held up a hand to stop her. "Rest now. Everything else can wait." After he had gone, Mrs. Henderson helped Eleanor out of her dusty, blood-stained clothing and into a borrowed nightgown. The older woman clucked sympathetically as she assisted Eleanor to wash her face and hands. "That Rowan Zimmerman," Mrs. Henderson remarked as she poured fresh water into a pitcher beside the bed. "Most dependable man in 3 counties. Owner of the Double Cross would be lost without him. He seems kind," Eleanor said cautiously. Mrs. Henderson gave her a knowing look. "Kind, yes, and honorable to a fault. Lost his whole family in the war, parents killed when Confederate raiders crossed into Pennsylvania. Younger brother died at Antietam. Never speaks of it, but everyone knows." Eleanor thought of the calm strength in Rowan's hands as he had lifted the wagon, the gentleness with which he had carried her. A man who had known loss but hadn't been broken by it. "Rest now," Mrs. Henderson advised, echoing Rowan's parting words. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Left alone, Eleanor closed her eyes, expecting sleep to claim her immediately after the day's ordeal. Instead, her mind replayed the moment when she had looked up to see Rowan Zimmerman silhouetted against the sky, coming to her aid when all hope seemed lost. It wasn't romance that stirred in her breast, she was too practical for such nonsense, but something equally powerful. Gratitude mingled with admiration, and perhaps the first tentative seed of trust. Sleep finally claimed her as the light faded from the small window, and Eleanor drifted off with the strange certainty that, Despite everything she had lost that day, something new and unexpected had been set in motion. True to his word, Rowan appeared at the boarding house the following morning. Eleanor had just finished the simple breakfast. Mrs. Henderson had brought cornbread, honey, and strong coffee when a knock came at her door. "Miss Porter, it's Rowan Zimmerman." "Come in, Mr. Zimmerman," she called, hastily smoothing her hair. She was sitting up in bed, her injured leg elevated on pillows as the doctor had instructed. Rowan entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. In the clear light of morning, Eleanor noticed details she had missed the day before: the streak of silver at his temple despite his relative youth, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. "You're looking better," he observed, his tone respectfully formal. "Fever?" "None," Eleanor assured him. "The doctor's remedies seem to be working." Rowan nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I've news about your wagon and belongings." Eleanor braced herself, expecting the worst. "My men righted the wagon. Axles broken beyond repair, but the rest is sound. Your oxen are at our ranch, being well tended. Most of your belongings were salvageable, some crockery broken, but your furniture and trunks weathered the accident better than you did." Relief washed over Eleanor. "I can't thank you enough." "No need for thanks. I've brought something else you might want." From his pocket, Rowan produced a folded document, her deed to the Mendoza property, which she had feared lost in the accident. "Found this among your scattered papers. Figured it was important." Eleanor took the deed with trembling fingers. "It is. Without this, I'd have no claim to the land, no way to start over." Rowan hesitated, then took a seat on the room's single chair when Eleanor gestured for him to do so. "About that land," he began carefully, "I spoke with Mr. Caldwell. He owns the Double Cross. The Mendoza property borders our south pasture. He's willing to buy it from you if you're interested. Offer you a fair price." Eleanor felt a flicker of disappointment. "You think I should sell, without even seeing it?" Rowan met her gaze directly. "I think you should consider all your options. That land's been sitting empty for 2 years. Buildings need work. It would be a hard start for anyone, especially a woman alone." Eleanor finished for him, a note of challenge in her voice. Rowan didn't flinch from her scrutiny. "Especially anyone without help," he corrected. "Man or woman?" Eleanor folded the deed carefully, considering his words. "I appreciate the concern, Mr. Zimmerman, but I didn't travel all this way to surrender at the first setback. I intend to claim my land." Something like approval flickered in Rowan's eyes. "Fair enough. In that case, I have a proposition. The Double Cross can provide you with a new wagon axle, help moving your belongings to the property, and some assistance getting the place habitable. In exchange, you help with our bookkeeping as we discussed, at least until you're established." Eleanor studied him, looking for the catch. "Why would your employer agree to this arrangement?" "Because good neighbors are valuable out here," Rowan said simply. "And because I asked him to." The implication that Rowan Zimmerman's request carried such weight with his employer was intriguing. There was clearly more to this cowboy than met the eye. "I'll accept your proposition," Eleanor decided. "On one condition." "Name it." "That you'll be honest with me about the challenges I'm facing. No false assurances out of misguided gallantry." A smile touched Rowan's lips, genuine and warm. "Miss Porter, I suspect you're not a woman who appreciates being coddled." "You suspect correctly, Mr. Zimmerman. Then we have an agreement." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Rest that leg. I'll return in a few days to discuss the details of moving you to your property once the doctor gives his approval." After Rowan left, Eleanor found herself smiling. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt a sense of possibility, not just for survival, but for building something meaningful. The days of Eleanor's recovery passed more quickly than she had anticipated. Mrs. Henderson proved to be not only an efficient landlady, but also a valuable source of information about Laredo and its inhabitants. Through her, Eleanor learned more about the Double Cross Ranch and its owner, Harold Caldwell, an aging cattleman who had built his spread from nothing in the years before the war. Old Caldwell never had children of his own, Mrs. Henderson explained as she changed Eleanor's bandages on the 5th day of her stay. Treats Rowan like the son he never had. Everyone expects Rowan will inherit a piece of the Double Cross when Caldwell passes. That would explain his influence, Eleanor mused. Influence, yes, but he's earned it. Started as just another hand, worked harder than 3 men put together. Now he's practically running the place, though he'd never claim it. Mrs. Henderson paused, giving Eleanor a speculative look. He's been by every day to check on you. Man's got responsibilities that would keep most busy from sunup to sundown. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. He feels responsible, that's all. Mrs. Henderson's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise, but she didn't press the issue. By the end of the week, Dr. Simmons declared Eleanor's leg to be healing nicely, though he still insisted on another week of limited activity. When Rowan visited that afternoon, Eleanor was sitting in a chair by the window, her leg propped on a stool, watching the busy main street of Laredo with interest. "Doctor says I can move to my property next week," she told him without preamble. "I'm eager to see it." Rowan nodded, taking the seat she offered. "I've had the men prepare the place as best they could. Roof needed patching, but the structure is sound. It's not fancy, but it'll keep you dry." "Thank you. I'm not accustomed to such kindness from strangers." "Neighbors," Rowan corrected her gently. "Not strangers anymore." There was something in his tone that made Eleanor look at him more closely. Over the past week, their daily conversations had gradually shifted from the practical matters of her recovery and property to more personal exchanges. She had told him about her life in St. Louis, her brief marriage to a man who had been kind but never truly understood her, the children she had lost. In turn, Rowan had shared carefully measured stories of his time with the Union cavalry, his journey west, and his years building a life at the Double Cross. What had begun as gratitude on Eleanor's part was evolving into something more complicated, a genuine interest in this quiet, capable man, and the life he had carved out in this rugged land. "Mr. Caldwell has invited you to dine at the ranch when you're settled," Rowan continued, unaware of her scrutiny. "He's curious about the woman who insists on taking on the Mendoza place alone." Eleanor smiled. "I look forward to meeting the man who recognized your worth when you arrived with nothing." A flicker of something surprise, perhaps, or pleasure crossed Rowan's face. "He's a good judge of character. You'll like him." The following week, as promised, Rowan arrived with a wagon to transport Eleanor to her property. Dr. Simmons made a final inspection of her leg, pronounced her fit to travel provided she continued to rest it regularly, and accepted the remainder of her payment with gruff professionalism. The journey to the Mendoza place took just over an hour. As they left the boundaries of Laredo behind, the landscape opened up rolling grasslands punctuated by stands of mesquite and oak, with the Rio Grande, a silver ribbon in the distance. Eleanor found herself unconsciously straightening, eyes bright with anticipation. "There it is," Rowan said finally, pointing to a low rise ahead. "The Mendoza place, your land." As they drew closer, Eleanor could make out a small adobe house nestled against the hillside, a barn and corral to one side, and what appeared to be a modest garden plot, now overgrown. It wasn't grand by any measure, certainly nothing like the comfortable home she had left in St. Louis, but in its simple lines and sturdy construction, she saw potential. "What do you think?" Rowan asked, watching her face carefully. "I think it's perfect," Eleanor replied and meant it. Rowan smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weather-lined face. "I hoped you'd see it that way." He helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, offering his arm for support as they walked toward the house. The door had been recently rehung, Eleanor noted, and the windows cleaned. Inside, she found simple but functional furniture, some her own, salvaged from the accident and some clearly borrowed or donated. The floor had been swept clean, and someone had placed a bunch of wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Mrs. Henderson sent some provisions to get you started," Rowan explained, indicating a basket on the kitchen counter. "And I took the liberty of having one of our men dig over the garden plot. Soil's good there. You could have a decent crop of vegetables before winter if you plant soon." Eleanor moved slowly through the small house, taking in each detail. There were 2 rooms, a main living area with the kitchen, and a smaller bedroom. Both were sparsely furnished but clean and sturdy. "Your men have done wonders," she said, genuinely impressed. "I expected months of work before it would be habitable." "Neighbors help neighbors," Rowan said simply. Besides, the men were happy to have a project that didn't involve chasing cattle or mending fences. As the afternoon light began to fade, Rowan reluctantly prepared to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow to show you where the best water is and help with anything else you need," he promised. "The ranch isn't far, about 2 miles that way." He pointed northwest. "If you need anything before then, fire 3 shots in the air. Someone will hear and come." Eleanor walked him to his wagon, suddenly aware of how alone she would be once he departed. It wasn't fear she felt exactly, but a strange hollowness at the thought of his absence. "Thank you, Rowan," she said, using his given name for the first time. "For everything." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "You're welcome, Eleanor," he replied, his voice low and warm. After he had gone, Eleanor sat on the small porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Texas sky. She was exhausted but exhilarated, afraid but determined. This small patch of earth was hers now, to shape and nurture as she saw fit. Despite all the setbacks and challenges, she had reached her destination. Sleep came easily that night in her new home, deep and dreamless in the profound silence of the open country. The following days established a pattern that gradually began to feel like a new normal for Eleanor. Each morning, she would work on making the house more of a home, arranging her salvaged possessions, planning improvements, and carefully tending the garden plot that Rowan's men had prepared. Her leg continued to heal, and though it still ached by day's end, she was able to move about with increasing freedom. True to his word, Rowan visited daily, usually in the late afternoon when his ranch duties were completed. He brought practical gift seeds for her garden, a mended harness for her oxen, a repaired rocking chair that had been damaged in the wagon accident. More valuable than these material offerings, however, was the knowledge he shared where to find the sweetest well water, which local plants were edible, how to predict the weather by watching the behavior of animals. Eleanor, in turn, began riding to the Double Cross twice a week to fulfill her part of their arrangement. The ranch's account books were in reasonable order, but could benefit from her more systematic approach. Old Mr. Caldwell proved to be a gruff but fair-minded man who clearly valued Rowan's judgment. He had accepted Eleanor without question on Rowan's recommendation. "That boy's never steered me wrong," Caldwell told her during her second visit to the ranch. "Said you had a head for figures and a backbone of steel. Seems he was right on both counts." Eleanor had smiled at that assessment, wondering what else Rowan might have said about her. As summer deepened into early autumn, Eleanor's small homestead began to flourish. The garden yielded its first harvest tomatoes, peppers, and beans that supplemented her diet and provided a small surplus she could trade in town. She had acquired 3 chickens from a neighboring farm, and their fresh eggs were a luxury she particularly enjoyed. Her oxen had been reharnessed to a new wagon, smaller than her original but perfectly functional for her needs. Through it all, Rowan's steady presence was a constant she found herself increasingly relying on, not because she couldn't manage alone, but because his company had become something she looked forward to each day. Their conversations had evolved from practical matters to deeper exchanges about hopes and philosophies, books they had read, and experiences that had shaped them. It was on a particularly fine September evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues, that Eleanor realized with sudden clarity what was happening between them. They had been discussing a passage from one of her books, Emerson's Essays, which Rowan had borrowed and returned with thoughtful comments. "I never had much formal schooling," he was saying, "but my father believed in education. Had me reading the classics when other boys were still struggling with their letters." "You miss him," Eleanor observed. Rowan nodded, his profile outlined in gold by the setting sun. "Every day. He was a good man, taught me that character matters more than circumstance." He turned to look at her directly. "He would have liked you." The simple statement carried a weight that made Eleanor's heart quicken. Would he? A woman who refuses to surrender to misfortune, who rebuilds with her own hands what life has taken from her. Yes, he would have admired you greatly. Rowan's voice had softened. "As do I." Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the evening heat. In that moment, with perfect clarity, she recognized that what had begun as gratitude and evolved into friendship had become something else entirely, something she had not expected to feel again after her husband's death. "Rowan," she began, uncertain how to proceed. He seemed to understand her hesitation. "You don't need to say anything, Eleanor. I just wanted you to know that your courage hasn't gone unnoticed." Before she could respond, the moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Rowan was on his feet instantly, his posture alert. "Stay here," he said, moving to the edge of the porch where his rifle leaned against the wall. 3 riders appeared on the road leading to her property. Even in the failing light, Eleanor could see they were not from the Double Cross. They rode directly to her house, reining in their horses with unnecessary force. "Evening," the lead rider called, his tone superficially polite but undercut with something harder. "This the old Mendoza place?" "It is," Rowan answered before Eleanor could speak. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The rider, a lean man with a pockmarked face, looked from Rowan to Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. Didn't realize the place had been sold. To a woman, no less. He touched his hat in Eleanor's direction, but the gesture seemed mocking rather than respectful. "I'm Eleanor Porter. This is my property." She stepped forward to stand beside Rowan, ignoring his cautionary glance. "Porter, is it? I'm Seth Wade. These are my brothers, Liam and Jesse." The other 2 men nodded curtly. "We run cattle on the open range hereabouts. Just wanted to introduce ourselves to our new neighbor." There was something in Wade's tone that put Eleanor immediately on guard. Beside her, she could feel Rowan's tension, though his expression remained impassive. "Miss Porter has been here for over a month now," Rowan said evenly. "Settling in nicely." Wade's gaze shifted to Rowan, recognition dawning. "You're Caldwell's foreman, Zimmerman, right?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting to find you out here. Double Cross land is northward, as I recall." "Good neighbors look out for each other," Rowan replied, his tone neutral but firm. Is that what you are? Neighbors? Wade's implication was clear, and Eleanor felt indignation rise within her. Mr. Zimmerman has been kind enough to assist me in establishing my homestead, she said coolly. As for your cattle, Mr. Wade, you should know that I intend to fence the eastern section of my property next month. If your herd is accustomed to grazing there, you'll need to make other arrangements. Wade's expression hardened. This land's been open range for years, madam. Fencing's not looked upon kindly by most cattlemen around here. Nevertheless, it's my right as the legal owner, Eleanor replied firmly. A tense silence followed, broken only by the snorting of the horses and the first evening calls of cicadas. We won't keep you any longer, Wade finally said, touching his hat again with that same mocking deference. Evening, Miss Porter. Zimmerman. He wheeled his horse around, his brothers following suit. As they rode away, Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I don't think I've made friends there, she remarked. Rowan's expression was grim. The Wades have been causing trouble in this county for years. They think the rules don't apply to them. He looked at her with concern. That business about fencing, are you certain that's wise right now? Eleanor's chin lifted stubbornly. It's my land, Rowan. I won't be intimidated from using it as I see fit. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but you won't do it alone. I'll bring some men from the ranch to help. And maybe we should move up your dinner with Mr. Caldwell. Having the biggest rancher in the county openly supporting you might make the Wades think twice. Eleanor agreed, though privately she wondered if even the Caldwell name would deter men like Seth Wade. She had come west seeking independence, but she was quickly learning that in this frontier land, alliances were not just beneficial, they might be essential. The dinner at the Double Cross Ranch house, 2 days later, proved to be a turning point in more ways than one. Harold Caldwell was a more gracious host than his gruff exterior suggested, and he seemed genuinely interested in Eleanor's plans for her property. Smart thinking, putting in a vegetable garden first thing, he approved as they dined on a surprisingly elegant meal prepared by the ranch's Mexican cook. Too many newcomers focus on cash crops and forget they need to eat through the winter. Thank you, Eleanor replied. I've been fortunate to have good advice. She glanced at Rowan, seated across the table, who acknowledged her comment with a slight smile. Zimmerman told me about your run-in with the Wade brothers, Caldwell continued, his tone darkening. Troublesome bunch. Father was hanged for horse theft back in '62, left those boys with nothing but a mean streak and a grudge against anyone who prospers. They seemed particularly unhappy about my plans to fence part of my land, Eleanor noted. Caldwell nodded. They've been grazing their scrub cattle on every unclaimed patch for years. Legal rights on your side, though. Your deed includes water rights to that section of the river, and under Texas law, that means you can fence your boundary. I intend to, Eleanor said firmly. Not to be difficult, but because I plan to expand my garden next spring, maybe add a few dairy cows. I can't have random cattle trampling through. Sensible, Caldwell approved. And don't you worry about the Wades. They may talk big, but they know better than to cross me or mine. He glanced significantly at Rowan. And it seems you've become one of ours, Miss Porter. The implication wasn't lost on Eleanor, nor on Rowan, whose expression remained carefully neutral even as a flush of color touched his tanned cheeks. After dinner, while Caldwell retired to his study with a cigar, Rowan offered to show Eleanor the ranch grounds. The autumn night was clear and cool, the stars impossibly bright away from even the modest lights of Laredo. They walked in companionable silence for a while, following a path that led away from the main house toward a small rise overlooking the ranch's home pasture. Mr. Caldwell seems confident the Wades won't be a problem, Eleanor remarked. Caldwell has influence, Rowan agreed, but the Wades don't always behave rationally. I've arranged for one of our hands to ride by your place daily when I can't be there myself. Eleanor stopped walking to look at him directly. I appreciate your concern, but I don't want to be a burden on you or the double cross. Rowan turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. You're not a burden, Eleanor. You've never been that. Something in his tone made her heart quicken. What am I, then? She asked softly. For a moment, Rowan seemed at a loss for words unusual for a man who typically spoke with such quiet assurance. When he finally answered, his voice was low and intent. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known, he said simply. When I found you that day, trapped under your wagon, I admired your courage. When I saw how you faced setback after setback without surrendering, that admiration grew. And now, he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Now I find that admiration has become something more. Something I didn't expect to feel again. Eleanor's breath caught. The directness of his words, free from flowery sentiment but all the more powerful for their honesty, touched her deeply. I feel it too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. This connection between us. It's not what I came west looking for, but perhaps it's what I needed to find. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, Rowan reached for her hand. His calloused palm was warm against her skin as their fingers intertwined. It was a simple gesture, but in the context of their lives and the times they lived in, it carried significant weight. I'm not a man of grand gestures or pretty speeches, Rowan said, his eyes never leaving hers. But I want you to know that whatever comes with the Wades, with your homestead, with anything, you won't face it alone unless that's what you choose. In response, Eleanor stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips gently to his, a brief, tender kiss that conveyed what words could not. When she drew back, Rowan's expression was one of wonder and quiet joy. He didn't try to pull her back into his embrace or deepen the kiss. Instead, with characteristic respect for her boundaries, he simply squeezed her hand gently. We should get back, he said softly, before Caldwell sends out a search party. Eleanor nodded, but as they walked back toward the ranch house, hand in hand under the Texas stars, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. The journey west had cost her dearly, nearly claimed her life and stripped her of many of her possessions. But in their place, she had found something unexpected, not just a home, but a potential future with a man whose quiet strength complemented her own determination. The next morning, Rowan rode Eleanor back to her homestead, both of them conscious of the subtle but significant change in their relationship. They spoke little during the journey, but the silence was comfortable, filled with shared understanding rather than awkwardness. As they approached her property, however, Eleanor sensed immediately that something was wrong. The front door of her small house stood open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. I didn't leave that open, she said, tensing. Rowan's hand went instinctively to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Stay here, he directed, dismounting and approaching the house with cautious steps. Eleanor, never one to follow orders blindly, dismounted as well but remained by the horses, watching anxiously as Rowan disappeared into her home. Long moments passed before he emerged, his expression grim. Someone's been through your things, he reported. Nothing seems to be missing, but they made a mess. Eleanor hurried inside to see for herself. The interior had indeed been ransacked, drawers pulled out, her few books scattered across the floor, the jar of wildflowers overturned on the table, water staining the wood. Why? She asked, surveying the damage with dismay. There's nothing valuable here. It's not about theft, Rowan said, his voice hard with anger. It's intimidation. The Wades or someone working for them, sending a message about your plans to fence your land. Eleanor moved through the small house, righting overturned furniture and gathering her scattered possessions. Her hands trembled slightly, but more from anger than fear. "If they think this will change my mind, they're mistaken," she said firmly. Rowan watched her for a moment, then joined in helping to restore order. "I need to report this to the sheriff," he said as they worked. "Not that Mercer will do much. He's more interested in keeping the peace in town than enforcing the law out here, but there should be a record." "And in the meantime?" Eleanor asked, setting a chair upright. "In the meantime, I don't think you should stay here alone," Rowan said carefully, clearly expecting resistance. To his surprise, Eleanor nodded. "I was thinking the same thing, but I won't be driven from my home, Rowan." "I wouldn't suggest it," he assured her. "I'm thinking one of our hands could bunk in the barn for a few nights. Miguel's reliable, and he owes me a favor." Eleanor considered this, then countered with her own suggestion. "Or I could stay at the Double Cross until we get that fence built. I'd still come here daily to tend my garden and animals, but at least at night." Rowan looked relieved at her pragmatism. "That makes sense. Caldwell would welcome you. He's taken quite a liking to you." "It's settled then," Eleanor said decisively. "I'll pack some things and we can go back to the ranch today." As they gathered what she would need for an extended stay, Eleanor felt a curious mix of emotions. The violation of her home had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but there was also a sense of resolve hardening within her. She had not come this far, overcome so many obstacles, to be frightened away by bullies like the Wades. And there was something else, a quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. The man carefully packing her mother's china into a crate with those strong, gentle hands had become more than a neighbor, more than a friend. He had become a partner, someone who understood her determination for independence, but offered support without attempting to control or diminish her. For the first time since setting out from St. Louis, Eleanor found herself thinking beyond mere survival, beyond the day-to-day work of establishing her homestead. She began to envision a future, one that included not just prosperity and security, but also companionship, respect, and yes, love. It was not the future she had planned when she had first headed west, but as she watched Rowan carefully secure her possessions in the wagon, she could not help but think it might be better than anything she had imagined. Life at the Double Cross quickly settled into a new routine. Eleanor was given a comfortable room in the main house, where she was treated with respect by the ranch hands and genuine warmth by old Mr. Caldwell. Each morning, she would ride to her homestead with Rowan or one of the trusted hands to tend her garden and animals, returning to the ranch by nightfall. Meanwhile, preparations for fencing her property progressed rapidly. Caldwell, seeing an opportunity to make a statement about property rights that would benefit all legitimate landowners, devoted considerable resources to the project. Cedar posts were cut, wire was ordered from San Antonio, and a crew of experienced hands was assigned to the task. The Wades made no further overt moves, but their presence was felt. Twice, riders were spotted observing the fencing work from a distance. Cattle belonging to their brand were deliberately driven across Eleanor's garden, trampling her carefully tended plants. Each provocation was met with calm resolve rather than escalation, though Eleanor could see the anger simmering beneath Rowan's controlled exterior. It was during this tense period that Eleanor's relationship with Rowan deepened. Their evenings at the ranch provided opportunities for long conversations on the wide porch, shared meals, and quiet moments away from the watchful eyes of others. They spoke of their pasts, their hopes, and gradually, their feelings for one another. "I never expected to find someone like you," Rowan confessed one evening as they walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property. "After the war, I thought that part of me, the part that could care deeply for another person, had died along with my family." Eleanor understood. "I felt the same after losing Thomas and the babies, as if grief had hollowed me out, left nothing but a shell capable of going through the motions of living." Rowan took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor. Not because you never feel fear or doubt, but because you keep moving forward despite them." She smiled up at him. "We're well matched in that respect, I think." Their first kiss at Caldwell's had been brief, almost tentative. The one they shared now, beside the murmuring creek with the Texas sunset painting the sky in fiery colors, was neither. It was a kiss born of mutual respect that had blossomed into something more profound, a recognition of kindred spirits who had found each other against all odds. When they finally returned to the ranch house, hand in hand, old Caldwell took one look at them and smiled knowingly. "About time," was all he said, returning to his newspaper with a satisfied nod. The fencing was completed by the end of October, a sturdy boundary marking the eastern edge of Eleanor's property, protecting her access to water and her plans for expanding her garden. The day the last section was finished, Rowan and the crew raised a small American flag on the corner post nearest the road, a symbol not of defiance, but of legitimate ownership and the rule of law. "Let's see them argue with that," one of the hands remarked with satisfaction. Eleanor surveyed the completed work with a sense of accomplishment. "I can't thank you all enough," she told the crew. "I'm hosting a dinner at my place this Sunday to show my appreciation. You're all invited." The men accepted with enthusiasm, particularly when Rowan mentioned that Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house had offered to assist with the cooking. The prospect of a home-cooked meal prepared by women was a rare treat for the ranch hands. As the crew packed up their tools and headed back to the ranch, Rowan lingered. "Are you sure about moving back here?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Eleanor nodded firmly. "This is my home, Rowan. I can't live in fear, and I can't impose on Mr. Caldwell's hospitality indefinitely." "You're not imposing," he assured her. "Caldwell enjoys having you there. Says you've brought some civilization back to his table." She smiled at that but remained resolute. "Nevertheless, I need to stand my ground. The fence is up, the hands know to keep an eye on the place, and frankly, I miss my independence." Rowan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'll be checking on you regularly." "I'm counting on it," Eleanor replied softly. The celebratory dinner that Sunday was a resounding success. Eleanor's small house was filled to bursting with ranch hands, Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Simmons, and even Sheriff Mercer, who had finally taken an interest in the situation after pressure from Caldwell. The meal was abundant, if simple: roast beef, fresh vegetables from what remained of Eleanor's garden, cornbread, and apple pies that Mrs. Henderson had contributed. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere was one of camaraderie and satisfaction in a job well done. Even Sheriff Mercer, initially reluctant to get involved in what he viewed as a property dispute, seemed impressed by the community support Eleanor had garnered. "You've made quite an impression, Miss Porter," he remarked as she served him a second slice of pie. "Not many newcomers manage to get the double cross and half the town on their side so quickly." "I'm fortunate in my neighbors," Eleanor replied diplomatically. The sheriff glanced meaningfully at Rowan, who was deep in conversation with Caldwell across the room. "Some more than others, it seems," he observed with a knowing smile. Eleanor felt herself blush but didn't deny it. Her relationship with Rowan was still new, still tender, but it was also increasingly obvious to anyone who saw them together. The way he looked at her, The way she instinctively turned to him, these were signs that couldn't be hidden, nor did she wish to hide them. As the guests began to depart with the setting sun, Eleanor stood on her porch, waving goodbye. Rowan remained, as did Caldwell, who had insisted on being the last to leave to ensure the lady's safety, as he put it, though Eleanor suspected he was intentionally giving her and Rowan some time alone. The three of them sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. Caldwell smoked his pipe contentedly, sharing stories of the early days in Laredo when the town had been little more than a trading post, and the Mexican border was more suggestion than reality. Things change, he mused. Not always for the better, but change comes regardless. Smart folks adapt. He glanced at Eleanor. Like you, young lady, turning misfortune into opportunity. I've had help, Eleanor acknowledged, her gaze meeting Rowan's briefly. Caldwell nodded sagely. Everyone needs help sometimes. Trick is knowing who to trust. He tapped his pipe against the porch railing, emptying the bowl. Speaking of trust, I've been meaning to talk to you both about something. Eleanor and Rowan exchanged curious glances. I'm not getting any younger, Caldwell continued matter-of-factly. Been thinking about the future of the double cross. Rowan here's been running most of it for years now, whether he admits it or not. Rowan started to protest, but Caldwell waved him off. No false modesty, son. We both know it's true. He turned to Eleanor. And you, Miss Porter, have shown more grit and business sense in a few months than most men I know have demonstrated in years. That's kind of you to say, Eleanor replied, uncertain where this was heading. It's not kindness, it's observation, Caldwell corrected her. Which brings me to my proposition. I want to formalize Rowan's position as my partner in the double cross. 51% remains with me for now, 49% to him. When I pass, his share increases to 75%, with the remainder divided among the hands who have been loyal the longest. Rowan looked stunned. Mr. Caldwell, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, Caldwell interrupted. There's more. Miss Porter, your property adjoins the southern boundary of the double cross. Combined, they would make one of the most efficient operations in the county. Your water rights, our grazing land, your gardening expertise, our cattle knowledge. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken as she began to understand what Caldwell was suggesting. Are you proposing a business merger, Mr. Caldwell? The old rancher's eyes twinkled. In a manner of speaking, though I suspect any merger might extend beyond merely business. He glanced pointedly between her and Rowan. I'm not one to meddle in personal matters, but I'm not blind either. You two have something special, the kind of partnership that could build something lasting. For once, Rowan seemed at a loss for words. Eleanor, however, found her voice. Mr. Caldwell, while I'm deeply honored by your confidence, I came west to establish my independence. I'm not sure I'm ready to surrender it, Caldwell finished for her. I'm not asking you to. Quite the opposite. I'm suggesting a true partnership. Your land remains yours, legally and practically. But together, you, Rowan, and by extension the double cross, would be stronger than any of you are alone. He stood, picking up his hat. Think about it. No need for an immediate answer. After Caldwell had departed, escorted by one of the hands who had remained behind, Eleanor and Rowan sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. He's a shrewd old man, Rowan finally said. Sees things others miss. Including us, Eleanor asked softly. Rowan turned to face her, his expression serious. Eleanor, what Caldwell is offering me, it's beyond anything I could have hoped for when I came west, but it would mean nothing without. He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. Without what? She prompted gently. Without you, he said simply. These past months, getting to know you, Watching you build this place with your own hands, seeing your courage and determination, it's changed me. Made me want things I'd given up on after the war." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming emotion his words evoked. "What things, Rowan?" He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "A partner. A future that's about more than just survival. A family, perhaps, someday." The word family sent a pang through Eleanor's heart, memories of the children she had lost, the fear that she might never experience motherhood again. Rowan seemed to read her thoughts. "I know about your losses," he said softly, "and I know they're part of who you are. I'm not asking to replace what you had before, or to rush you into anything. I'm just asking for a chance for us to see what we might build together, at whatever pace feels right." Eleanor studied his face in the moonlight, the strong lines, the steady gaze that had never wavered since the day he had lifted that wagon off her broken body. In that moment of crisis, he had shown his true character, and every day since had only confirmed it. "I think," she said slowly, "that Mr. Caldwell's proposal merits serious consideration. The business aspects make practical sense." "And the personal aspects?" Rowan asked, his voice carefully neutral though his eyes revealed his hope. In answer, Eleanor moved closer, bringing her hand to his cheek. "Those merit even more serious consideration," she murmured, before leaning in to kiss him softly. Rowan's arms encircled her gently, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late." Eleanor nodded, though part of her wished he could stay. Propriety still mattered, especially in a small community like Laredo where reputations could be easily damaged. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked. "We can discuss Caldwell's proposal further." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Rowan promised, pressing one more kiss to her forehead before reluctantly taking his leave. As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, her mind was filled with possibilities she had never anticipated when she had set out from St. Louis. She had come west seeking independence, a fresh start after loss. She had found those things, yes, but also something she hadn't been looking for: a man whose strength complemented her own, whose respect for her autonomy never wavered, and whose steadfast nature promised a foundation upon which something enduring could be built. The future stretching before her was not the one she had envisioned, but as she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor realized it might be something better, a life not just of survival and independence, but of partnership, purpose, and perhaps even joy. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first real hint of winter in the air. Eleanor rose early, her mind made up about several things after a night of reflection. She tended her chickens, checked her remaining garden plants for frost damage, and was just preparing breakfast when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart lifted, expecting Rowan, but as she stepped onto the porch, she saw instead 3 riders, the Wade brothers, approaching her property with purpose in their bearing. Eleanor straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. She had faced worse than these men and survived. Still, she wished Rowan were already here, or that she had accepted Caldwell's offer to leave one of the hands at her place overnight. "Morning, Miss Porter," Seth Wade called as they reined in their horses at her fence line, pointedly, not entering her property this time. "Fine day." "Mr. Wade," Eleanor acknowledged coolly. "What brings you here?" Wade dismounted, his brothers remaining on horseback. "Came to discuss business, madam, civilized-like." Eleanor remained on her porch, maintaining the high ground both literally and figuratively. "What business could we possibly have, Mr. Wade?" "That fence you've put up," Wade said, gesturing to the boundary line. It's causing problems for my cattle, cutting them off from water they've used for years. Water that legally belongs to this property, Eleanor countered. As Mr. Caldwell and Sheriff Mercer have both confirmed, Wade's expression hardened momentarily before he forced a smile. Laws are one thing, Miss Porter. Practical matters are another. I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for water rights. Say, $50 for access through the end of next year. The offer was insultingly low, but Eleanor suspected that was intentional, a further attempt at intimidation rather than a genuine business proposal. My water rights aren't for sale, Mr. Wade, she said firmly. Not for $50, not for $500, but I'm willing to discuss a limited easement for your cattle, properly documented and with fair compensation. Wade's false smile vanished. You're making a mistake, madam. A woman alone out here can run into all sorts of troubles. Before Eleanor could respond to the thinly veiled threat, the sound of approaching riders drew everyone's attention. Rowan appeared, riding hard from the direction of the double cross, with two ranch hands flanking him. His expression as he took in the scene was thunderous. "Everything all right, Eleanor?" he called as they approached, deliberately using her given name to signal their relationship. "Just fine," she replied evenly. Mr. Wade was leaving. Wade's eyes narrowed as he looked between Eleanor and Rowan. "Seems I was mistaken about you being alone," he observed sardonically. "Zimmerman's been mighty attentive, hasn't he?" "Miss Porter is under the protection of the double cross," Rowan stated, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Any trouble that finds her finds us." Wade held Rowan's gaze for a long moment, then shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "No trouble here, just a business discussion that's concluded." He remounted his horse with deliberate slowness. "Good day, Miss Porter. Zimmerman." As the Wade brothers rode away, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Rowan dismounted quickly, crossing to the porch in long strides. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concern evident. "Did they threaten you?" "Not directly," Eleanor replied. "They offered to buy water rights at an absurd price, then implied I might have troubles if I refused." Rowan's jaw tightened. "That's it. You can't stay here alone anymore, Eleanor, not with them making explicit threats." For once, Eleanor didn't argue. The encounter had unnerved her more than she wanted to admit, not for her own safety so much as for what it represented, the knowledge that there were still men who believed they could intimidate others into surrendering what was rightfully theirs. "I've been thinking about Mr. Caldwell's proposal," she said, changing the subject. "The business aspects make sense, as I said last night. Combining our properties would create something stronger than either is alone." Rowan studied her face, seemingly trying to gauge whether she was simply deflecting from the Wade situation. "And the personal aspects?" he asked cautiously. Eleanor met his gaze directly. "Those make even more sense," she said softly. "I came west seeking independence, Rowan, but I've discovered something important. True independence isn't about being alone. It's about having the freedom to choose one's own path and one's own partner." Understanding dawned in Rowan's eyes. "Eleanor, are you saying—" "I'm saying yes," she interrupted gently. "Yes to Caldwell's business proposal, and yes to what you were too honorable to ask directly last night." She took a step closer to him. "I want to build something with you, Rowan Zimmerman. Something that honors both our need for purpose and our capacity for love." For a moment, Rowan seemed stunned, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then, with a movement that took Eleanor by surprise, he swept her into his arms, lifting her clear off the porch in an embrace that expressed what words could not. When he set her down again, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I don't have much to offer," he began, but Eleanor pressed her fingers gently to his lips, stopping him. "You have everything to offer," she corrected him. "Strength without domination, support without control, respect for who I am and what I need." She smiled up at him. "Those things are worth more than gold to me." Rowan's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. "In that case, Eleanor Porter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, partner in life as well as business?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Though we have practical matters to settle first." She glanced meaningfully in the direction the Wades had taken. "One thing at a time," Rowan agreed. "First, we need to get you safely back to the Double Cross until we can deal with the Wade situation permanently." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the wisdom in this approach. "I'll pack a few things. But Rowan," she added, catching his hand as he turned to instruct the hands about securing her property, "I won't be driven permanently from my home. Whatever solution we find has to allow us to live here if we choose." "I wouldn't have it any other way," he assured her. "This land is part of who you are now. I understand that." As they rode back to the Double Cross an hour later, Eleanor's few essential possessions packed in saddlebags, she felt a curious sense of coming full circle. Months ago, she had arrived in this territory alone, determined to make her own way. Now she was returning to the ranch not as a helpless victim in need of charity, but as a woman who had proven her worth and made her choice a choice based not on necessity, but on the recognition of something rare and valuable. Caldwell was waiting on the ranch house porch when they arrived, as if he had anticipated their return. One look at their faces told him all he needed to know. "Well," he prompted, his gruff tone belied by the twinkle in his eyes. "We accept your proposal," Rowan told him, dismounting and turning to help Eleanor down, though she scarcely needed the assistance. "All of it." The old rancher's face split into a broad grin. "About time you came to your senses, both of you." He clapped Rowan on the shoulder, then surprised Eleanor by taking her hand and pressing it briefly to his cheek in a gesture of almost paternal affection. "Now, I suspect we have a wedding to plan and some troublemakers to deal with, not necessarily in that order." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Formal partnership papers were drawn up between Caldwell, Rowan, and Eleanor, creating a new entity that combined the Double Cross Ranch with the Mendoza property. Eleanor insisted that her land remain legally in her name, even as it became operationally part of the larger enterprise, a stipulation that Caldwell accepted with a knowing nod, and Rowan supported without reservation. The Wade situation required more delicate handling. After consulting with Sheriff Mercer and the county judge, a formal cease and desist order was issued, prohibiting the Wades from trespassing on either Eleanor's property or the Double Cross. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it put the weight of law firmly on their side. Meanwhile, plans for a simple wedding proceeded. Eleanor was touched by how the community embraced the event. Mrs. Henderson insisted on helping with the dress, modifying one of Eleanor's better gowns with lace she had been saving for a special occasion. The ranch hands, rough men unaccustomed to sentiment, nonetheless went out of their way to offer congratulations and small tokens of their esteem, a hand-carved wooden box from Miguel, wildflower seeds gathered by young Tommy, the newest hand. Through it all, Eleanor found herself drawing closer to Rowan, their conversations deepening as they shared hopes and plans for their future together. He spoke of expanding the garden at her homestead into a proper kitchen farm that could supply both their needs and provide surplus for sale in town. She suggested improvements to the ranch's accounting systems that would increase efficiency and profitability. Together, they discussed the possibility of children, a subject that once would have been too painful for Eleanor to contemplate, but now filled her with cautious hope. "I can't promise it will happen," she told Rowan one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch watching the sunset. "After losing the babies." "I know," he said gently, his hand covering hers. "And if it's just us, that's enough for me, Eleanor. But if we're blessed with children, I can promise you this: they'll know they're loved, and they'll learn what strength looks like from their mother." The wedding itself was held on a crisp November morning in the small Laredo church. Eleanor wore her modified gown with a crown of late-blooming wildflowers in her hair. Rowan, unaccustomed to formal attire, nevertheless cut a striking figure in a new suit purchased for the occasion. Caldwell stood as Rowan's best man, beaming with undisguised pride, while Mrs. Henderson served as Eleanor's matron of honor. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows spoken with conviction by both bride and groom. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Rowan's kiss was both tender and promising, a pledge of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the Double Cross was joyous and well attended. It seemed most of Laredo had turned out to wish them well, even Sheriff Mercer, who surprised everyone by presenting the couple with a fine Winchester rifle for protection of hearth and home, as he put it. Conspicuously absent were the Wade brothers, a fact noted with relief by most of the guests. Their silence since the cease and desist order was cause for cautious optimism, though Rowan and Caldwell maintained a discreet watch throughout the festivities. As the celebration continued into the evening, Rowan drew Eleanor aside, leading her to a quiet corner of the ranch house veranda. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in plain cloth. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully to reveal a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. "It's beautiful," she murmured, touched by the unexpected gift. "Open it," Rowan encouraged. Inside was a tiny, perfectly pressed wildflower, the same kind that had been blooming on the ridge the day they had first met, when he had lifted the wagon that trapped her. "I went back and gathered it the next day," Rowan explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "Wasn't sure why at the time, except that it reminded me of how you looked up at me when I first found you, afraid but determined, refusing to surrender." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "You've saved me in more ways than one, Rowan Zimmerman," she said softly. He shook his head, his expression serious. "No, Eleanor, you saved yourself. I just helped with the heavy lifting." A smile touched his lips. "Literally that first time." She laughed, the sound bright with happiness, and reached up to touch his cheek. "Then we'll help each other with the heavy lifting from now on. Partners in everything." "Partners," Rowan agreed, leaning down to seal the promise with a kiss. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Caldwell approached the newlyweds with a final surprise. "Wedding gift," he announced, handing Rowan an envelope. "Deed to the foreman's house at the south boundary. Been vacant since old Peterson retired last year. Needs some work, but it's solid. And it happens to sit right at the junction of the Double Cross and Eleanor's property. Seemed fitting." Eleanor opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she realized what Caldwell had done. The small but sturdy house he was gifting them was perfectly positioned close enough to the main ranch operations for Rowan's work, but situated on what was technically her land, honoring her connection to the property she had fought so hard to claim. "This is too generous," Rowan began, but Caldwell waved away his protest. "Consider it an investment in the future of the Double Cross," the old rancher said gruffly. "Besides, can't have the newlyweds living under my roof. A man needs his peace and quiet." As the last guests departed and the ranch settled into evening stillness, Rowan and Eleanor found themselves alone on the porch of what was now their temporary home, until they could move into the foreman's house. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear November sky, a tapestry of light against the vast Texas darkness. "Are you happy?" Rowan asked softly, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders as they gazed upward. Eleanor considered the question, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had left St. Louis a widow, burdened by loss and uncertainty. She had nearly died on a dusty ridge, trapped beneath the very wagon that was meant to carry her to a new beginning. She had faced intimidation, setbacks, and the daunting task of building a life from nothing in this untamed land. Yet through it all, she had found something she hadn't known. She was seeking not just a home, but a place to belong. Not just a partner, but a man who saw her strength as an asset rather than a challenge. Not just survival, but the promise of a life rich with purpose and, yes, with love. "I'm more than happy," she answered honestly. "I'm home." Rowan's arm tightened around her, and as Eleanor leaned into his embrace, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from the Wades or from the natural hardships of frontier life, they would face them together. The wagon that had nearly claimed her life had led her to the man who had not only saved her, but had shown her a new definition of strength, one built on partnership rather than dominance, on mutual respect rather than control. In lifting that wagon, Rowan Zimmerman had freed more than her body. He had helped free her spirit to embrace a future neither of them could have imagined on that fateful day. And as they stood together under the endless Texas sky, that future stretched before them, filled with promise, with possibility, and with the enduring strength they had found in each other. 5 years later, the spring morning dawned clear and warm as Eleanor Zimmerman stepped onto the porch of the house she shared with Rowan, a cup of coffee in her hands and contentment in her heart. The past 5 years had transformed both the landscape around her and the trajectory of her life in ways she could never have predicted that day. Her wagon had overturned on the dusty ridge. The house itself, the former foreman's dwelling gifted to them by Caldwell, had been expanded and improved, with a new kitchen, a larger porch, and 2 additional bedrooms. The garden Eleanor had started on her original homestead had grown into a productive kitchen farm that supplied not only their household, but also provided vegetables and preserves for sale in Laredo. Her careful accounting and business sense had helped the Double Cross prosper, expanding its operations and its reputation throughout the county. Rowan had flourished as Caldwell's partner, bringing innovative practices to the ranch's cattle operation while maintaining the older man's commitment to fair dealing and quality stock. When Caldwell had passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years earlier, the transition of leadership had been seamless, a testament to the solid foundation they had built together. Most precious of all was the sound that now reached Eleanor's ears: childish laughter from the side yard, where their 3-year-old son, Thomas Harold Zimmerman, was being taught to rope by his proud father. The boy's birth had been something of a miracle, coming after Eleanor had resigned herself to childlessness. His arrival had healed a wound in her heart she had thought permanent, and watching him grow sturdy, curious, and already showing signs of his father's quiet determination was a daily joy. The Wade brothers had eventually moved on, selling their meager holdings after a particularly harsh winter had decimated their poorly managed herd. Without their threatening presence, the community had grown more stable, with new settlers arriving regularly, drawn by stories of fertile land and the protective influence of the Double Cross. Eleanor's reflections were interrupted by the approach of Rowan and Thomas, the latter riding proudly on his father's shoulders. "Mama," Thomas called excitedly, "I roped the post, all by myself, did you now?" Eleanor smiled, setting down her coffee to receive her son as Rowan swung him from his shoulders. "That's wonderful, my brave boy." "He's a natural," Rowan confirmed, his expression soft with fatherly pride. Just like his mother determined to master whatever he sets his mind to. Eleanor laughed. I think he gets that from both of us. She brushed a lock of hair from her son's forehead. Go wash up now, Thomas. Breakfast will be ready soon, and then we need to get ready for the celebration. As the boy scampered inside, Rowan stepped closer to Eleanor, drawing her into a gentle embrace. 5 years today, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. 5 years, she agreed. The community gathering planned for later that day was ostensibly to celebrate the 5th anniversary of their wedding, but it had grown to represent something more, a recognition of how their partnership had helped strengthen and stabilize the entire region. Any regrets? Rowan asked, though the question was asked with the security of a man who knew the answer. Eleanor shook her head, leaning into his embrace. Not one. Every challenge, every difficulty, has only confirmed what I knew the day you lifted that wagon off me, that you are the strongest, most honorable man I've ever known. Rowan's arms tightened around her. That wagon was heavy, he admitted with a smile in his voice, but not nearly as heavy as the thought of losing you would have been, even then when I hardly knew you. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. Well, you don't have to worry about that. I'm here to stay, Mr. Zimmerman. Promise. He asked, his voice suddenly serious. Promise, she affirmed, sealing the word with a kiss. From inside the house came the sound of Thomas calling for them, eager for breakfast and the day's festivities. Eleanor and Rowan exchanged one more look, a look of partnership, of shared purpose, of enduring love before turning to go inside, hand in hand, to embrace the future they had built together. The wagon that had nearly claimed Eleanor's life had become, in the alchemy of fate and courage, the vehicle that had delivered her to her true destiny. And the man who had lifted it, using strength born of necessity and compassion, had become the cornerstone of a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined that fateful day on the dusty ridge outside Laredo. In the wild, untamed beauty of the Texas frontier, Eleanor Porter Zimmerman had found not just survival, but triumph, not just independence, but the deeper freedom that comes from choosing to build a life with someone who lifts you up without holding you down. And in that triumph, in that freedom, she had found lasting joy.